Whether Boise State Public Radio brings a smile to your day, some inspiration, or a greater connection to Idaho and the world, we're proud to be here with you. Federal funding, about $1.60 per person annually, helps keep these trusted services strong and accessible to everyone in our community. Learn how you can safeguard local public media stations like ours by visiting protectmypublicmedia.org.
More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudette. So have you ever stopped and wondered how the Payette River Basin and the Payette National Forest got their names? Well, look no farther than the French-Canadian trapper who explored central Idaho's mountains and rivers in the early part of the 19th century. His name, François Payette. A new novel, which is titled François, is inspired by Payette's early life. The book's author, F.A. Loomis, is joining us now to talk more about this newest book. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Gemma. Happy to be here.
So the Idahoans are used to seeing roads and park signs that say Payette Lake, Payette River. I mean, there's Payette, Idaho. But I think a lot of people may not know that it was named after an actual person. So tell us why you decided to write a book about François Payette and who he was.
Well, when I was growing up in 1950s Idaho, of course, I had heard about the French trapper François Payette. He was among the first white people to set foot in central Idaho, and much of his time was spent here in central Idaho. And I didn't know much about him, and I was not excited to trap animals like he was. We trapped animals on our ranch because they bothered the irrigation ditches, the squirrels. But he trapped foxes, beavers, bobcats, otters, cougar, bears, and many varieties of the weasel clan, mink, and wolverines. But François Payette had always intrigued me, mostly because of the natural features that are named after him. And I examined the historical records to see how much material there was about him. After all these years, I figured some research fellow somewhere had already written a historical biography, and I was eager to learn who. As I dug through state archives, however, there was not much to go on in the historical record, and a lot of it showed conflicting information. So I decided to write a novel, since I have a familiarity with that mode of writing, and I wrote a novel about his early life from the early 1800s to 1844, when he retired from the Fort Boise that was at the time near Parma along the Snake River. But what seemed most accurate about his life was a rough timeline about where he was on given dates while he was employed by different trapping companies. There were about 3 major trapping companies that changed hands over the years, and he ended up with Hudson's Bay Company toward the end of his life, or toward the end of his trapping career. And I first created a timeline based on roughly where he was on those dates and with whom he was traveling, other trappers, etc., military personnel, and Indian groups. And there was especially conflicting information after he left employment with Hudson's Bay Company in 1844. So I focused on his early life as a trapper. And after that date, 1844, some stories have him returning to Quebec after retiring and taking a French-Canadian wife. Another account has him finding his own burial ground on a slope above the Snake River near present-day Payette, Idaho. I decided to cap my story at his retirement, since I didn't want to do a lot of research in French Canada.
So was it easier to write a novel versus like a biography? Because as you mentioned, there is a lot of conflicting information about him.
Well, I thought I've written both fiction and nonfiction books, and I weighed that considerably, but I just didn't think that I had enough to go on for a nonfiction official biography. There just really wasn't that much information, and I was more comfortable with the novel with respect to the storyline that I was presented with him. As a trapper, he lived a very lonely and gritty life in many respects, though a lot of early trappers became friendly with Native American tribes. Many of them developed common law style amorous involvements with tribal women. Some of the historical evidence shows that Payette was personable and cordial when dealing with Oregon Trail immigrants who stopped at Old Fort Boise near Parma along the Snake River. He was that fort supervisor there toward the end of his trapping career. He even, at least on one occasion, went out of his way to leave his post and help missionaries, I believe the Spaldings or Whitmans, construct buildings in Washington State. So he left his post to go over there and help them out.
So the Whitmans, as in the Whitman College, right?
Yes.
Marcus Whitman.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So how did you go about the writing process?
Well, most of the trappers were quick to learn native languages and subsequently became valuable as interpreters, working among Native Americans, white settlers, traders, and military personnel. One well-documented event, however, claims that Payette had a quick temper. I virtually went over all the accounts that I could turn up, but in one that's fairly well verified, he killed a young brave whom he thought had stolen his horse. And he used a hunting knife and was very quick to dispatch vigilante justice. And I had at the time been visiting a young man in the county jail who had been put into jail for manslaughter, and I was doing some chaplaincy work for the Catholic diocese. And this young man intrigued me because he was sorry for what he had done. He admitted his guilt and was seeking ways to establish restitution for what he'd done. And since Payette had been baptized and confirmed a Roman Catholic as a child in Montreal, I felt it was fair to consider portraying Payette as someone that might have subsequently been troubled by his act of killing this young man. So in a creative leap as a novelist, I had him cross the path of the famous Idaho-Montana missionary Jesuit Father Pierre Jean de Smet to confess and seek absolution for his crime. There was a correspondence in time, actually, when they could have met, but that's what fiction writers do.
So with that said, it sounds like there really wasn't enough of an outline to really write his entire life story.
No, what I had was enough for the records that were most accurate were the trading company records. They were all kept by clerks who monitored where these trappers were and what regions they were. And Payette was all over the Northwest. He wasn't just in central Idaho. He was in Montana. He was in Utah. He was in Wyoming, Jackson. He was in Oregon, the Burnt River country up there near west of Bend, or not west of the town that's just north of
Bend.
Baker City. And it was rumored in some historical accounts that Payette took multiple Native American wives. But as I said, the accuracy of the stories were really mixed. Some stories sounded more accurate if they talked about him having 2 wives and several children. But there were accounts out there that said he had 8 or 10 women that he was involved with and up to 12 children. So for the best accounts that I could see for my purpose, I settled on him having 1 common law wife from the Pend Oreille tribe and 1 woman paramour from the Bannock tribe, each of them bearing him 1 child. And there are no accounts that I found indicating what became of his children, apart from one that verified his son went back east to school and then back to Western Canada to finish another school. And I included some information about there were fictional accounts of the women in the book. One is half native Pend Oreille, daughter of a fellow trapper he met in eastern Idaho, and the other was a full-blooded Bannock woman. And he meets the Bannock woman in the Emmetsville area, it was called at the time, and the Pend Oreille woman while visiting his trapper friend in eastern Idaho. And it appears that he may have married, in a common law sense, the Pend Oreille, the half Pend Oreille woman. The Pend Oreille woman becomes a common law wife in the book, and at least one historical record suggested that her name was Nancy Portnoy, the daughter of his trapper friend, Joe Portnoy. And she eventually took her own life after possibly suffering a terminal illness. The Bannock woman stayed with her tribe after her involvement with Payette, and I portray her as grieving in her last years and therefore becoming more of a medicine woman in her tribe who found comfort through comforting others. And this character is based roughly on what I know of my own great-great-grandmother, who was half Iroquois, and her name was Corintha Bell.
What do you hope people take away from reading this book?
I hope people take away just a sense of enjoyment of a story about somebody who is a historical personage in this area. They understand, of course, it's a novel, but a lot of the characterization in the book is based on experiences that I know from other people who have spoken of the trapper life. There is a segment in the book that is by a great nephew of the trapper who was with the Lewis and Clark expedition, Herschel Coulter, and John Coulter was the Lewis and Clark expedition's trapper. And I talked to him quite a bit about modern trapping methods and how they varied from 100 or 200 years ago. And actually, Governor Brad Little enjoyed the book, gave me some appreciative comments about some things that were in the book. I mentioned in the book that two young Indian children were rescued from a massacre in the Midwest, and they were raised in Garden Valley. And one of the young people was actually associated with a piece of property that the governor's brother owns over in the Emmett area.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today about your newest novel. We've been speaking with Idaho author and journalist F.A. Loomis about his new novel, François. It is inspired by the early life of French-Canadian trapper François Payette. This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudette.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.